In the 4th and 3rd millennia BCE, complex civilizations flourished in the river valleys of Mesopotamia, India, China, and Egypt. Despite the significant technological advance, the agricultural revolution did not lead to a better standard of living. Its benefits appear to have been offset by various adverse effects, mostly diseases and warfare. The shift from hunter-gatherer to agriculture subsistence gave rise to social stratification, coercion, and alienation. As a consequence, the ancient Mesopotamians, for example, came to believe that the netherworld was home to many demons, which could sometimes terrorize mortals on Earth. The personification of evil served the social function of designating a particular entity as a threat, thereby invoking an intense emotional response to that entity and increasing the cohesiveness of the community. Hesiod, born in Asia Minor in the 8th century BCE, offered accounts of the successive ages of humanity, which progressed from an original long-gone age in which humans enjoyed a nearly divine existence to an age of decadence, in which humans are beset by innumerable pains and evils. During the Primordial Age or Golden Age, peace and harmony prevailed, in that people did not have to work to feed themselves. The earth provided food in abundance. The Golden Age was presided over by Kronos, also known as Saturn, who was both a benevolent creator of prosperity and a hideous cannibal devouring his own children. This primordial age ended when Prometheus conferred on humankind the gift of fire, invented fine arts, and taught many skills. He was an ambivalent figure whose efforts to improve human existence could also result in tragedy. Angered by the theft of fire, Zeus ordered the creation of a woman, named her Pandora, and entrusted her with a box that she was forbidden to open. However, her uncontrollable curiosity got the better of her, and she opened the box, thereby unleashing all manner of evil into the world. The Hindu epic Mahabharata has a similar narrative of a primordial age known as Satya Yuga, in which there was no agriculture or mining and no crime. Most ancient deities, such as Agni, the Hindu fire-bringer, were usually benevolent, but sometimes mischievous or capricious. They manifested the creator, maintainer, destroyer aspects of nature, and the ambivalence of the human spirit, being simultaneously angel and demon. The word demon, which has acquired a negative meaning in English, derives from the Greek daimon and is cognate with deity and divine. Daimons were seen as the souls of Golden Age people acting as tutelary deities in the Greco-Roman world. Pantheism is the belief that reality is identical with divinity, and that all things compose an all-encompassing, immanent God. Early traces can be found within the theology of ancient Greek religions, where Pan, the all, was made cognate with Pan, the horned god of nature, and Phanes, the god of light. The name Phanes is derived from the Greek phos, meaning light, and related to phosphorus, which refers to the planet Venus and translates to light bearer. Kronos is said to have created the cosmic egg out of which burst the androgynous Phanes, having both a phallus and a vagina. Thomas Cole represented Hesiod's 5 Ages of Humanity in a series of paintings in the 1830s. The Golden Age shows a valley from the shore opposite a crag in the dim light of a dawning stormy day. Clouds and mist shroud much of the distant landscape, hinting at an uncertain future. In the Pastoral Age, the sky has cleared and it looks like the fresh morning of a spring day. much of the wilderness has given way to settled lands with plowed fields and lawns. In the consummation age, it is noontide of a glorious summer day. Both sides of the river valley are now covered in a colonnaded marble structure, whose steps run down into the water. In the destruction age, it seems that a fleet of enemy warriors has overthrown the city's defenses. A bridge has collapsed, and fire breaks from the upper floors of a palace on the riverbank. The desolation age shows the remains of the city in the livid light of a dying day. The landscape has begun to return to wilderness, and no humans are to be seen. The Hindu concept of dharma, or righteousness, clearly divides the world into good and evil, but the main emphasis is on bad actions rather than bad people. The Hindu holy text Bhagavad Gita speaks of the balance of good and evil, and when this balance goes off, divine incarnations come to help to restore it. In ancient Vedic literature, Maya refers to power in the physical plane. In later Vedic texts and modern literature, Maya connotes illusion and delusion, or the cosmic power that conceals the true character of spiritual reality. The Chinese cognate mo means magic and hallucination, and derives from the term ma, meaning hemp or numbness. Maya is also the name of the Buddha's mother, while Mara is the personification of the forces antagonistic to enlightenment, which try to prevent the Buddha from attaining spiritual liberation. The Buddha taught the existence of evil inclinations that require special spiritual knowledge to conquer. Good and evil were perceived as part of an antagonistic duality that itself must be overcome through achieving recognition of good and evil being interdependent and therefore illusory. The primal duality in Buddhism is between suffering and enlightenment. So evil means whatever stands in the way of liberation, such as greed, hate, and delusion. Dvaita, meaning dualistic, is a school in the Vedanta tradition of Hindu philosophy which theorizes the existence of two separate realities. The first, and the only independent reality, is that of Vishnu as the supreme God. The second reality is that of the dependent but equally real universe that exists on the human level, such as matter, the soul, the spirits, and so on. Vamachara, meaning left-hand path, is a Sanskrit term used to describe a particular mode of worship, which is heterodox and unconventional. The converse term is Dakshinachara, that is, right-hand path, referring to modes of spirituality that are generally agreeable to mainstream worldviews. Chod is a spiritual practice that emerged in Tibet from the fusion of Bon and Nyingma traditions. Bon, meaning invocation, is the primeval shamanic tradition of the Himalayan region. Nyingma, meaning ancient, is the oldest of the four major schools of Tibetan Buddhism. Chod serves to cut through hindrances and obscurations created by Maya or Mara. Chod meditative rituals include a stunning array of visualizations, songs, music, and prayer, accepting willingly what is undesirable, and throwing oneself defiantly into unpleasant circumstances. Chod enables the practitioner to maintain Rigpa, that is, primordial awareness. The term Rigpa is equivalent to the Hindu concept of jnana and the Greek gnosis, which is cognate with the English knowledge. At the dawn of Taoism, yin and yang refer to two opposite sides of a mountain facing toward and away from the sun. Later on, they came to symbolize female and male, as well as dark and light. The Taijitu, commonly known as the yin and yang symbol, represents the philosophy of balance, where two opposites coexist in harmony and are able to transmute into each other like an undertow in the ocean. Every advance is complemented by a retreat, and every rise turns into a fall. A seed will sprout from the earth and grow upwards towards the sky. Then, when it reaches its full potential height, it will fall. In the Taojitu, there is a dot of yin in yang, and a dot of yang in yin. An ordinary chessboard and a Masonic tracing board of the first degree also symbolize the interconnectedness of the opposite forces as different aspects of the cosmos. Contrast is needed to create a distinguishable reality, without which we would experience nothingness. By interacting in a feedback loop, opposing forces give birth to reality as we know it. A way to illustrate this idea is to postulate the notion of a race with only women or only men. This race would disappear in a single generation. In the eastern part of ancient Persia, in the 7th century BCE, the philosopher Zoroaster, also known as Zarathustra, simplified the pantheon of early Iranian gods into two opposing forces, Ur-Mazda and Ahriman. The idea developed into an extreme dualistic belief that the material world should be shunned and the spiritual world should be embraced. Zoroaster was the first to articulate the notions of heaven and hell, judgment after death, and free will. His cosmogony had significant influence on Judaism, Christianity, and Manichaeism. In the 6th century BCE, several philosophical concepts based on Zoroastrianism, Taoism, and Hinduism traveled to Asia Minor. One of those who welcomed and elaborated these ideas was Heraclitus. He was nicknamed the obscure philosopher, most famous for his view on impermanence, as stated in the popular saying, "No man ever steps in the same river twice," as well as Panta Rei, which translates to "everything flows." Another well-known statement is, "There is harmony in the tension of opposites, as in the case of the bow and lyre." Heraclitus considered fire as the most fundamental element. This belief was rooted in Vedic tradition and the Homa ritual, wherein any religious offering is made into fire. In ancient India, ascetics developed yogic practices and philosophical concepts, such as the samsara cycle of death and rebirth, and moksha, liberation from that cycle. Pythagoras was born on the Greek island of Samos in 570 BCE. After traveling to Central Asia, he relocated to southern Italy. What he taught his followers, namely reincarnation, not killing animals, the psyche, and the cosmos, points directly at Hindu philosophy. His name is also said to have been derived from the Sanskrit Peter Guru, which translates to father teacher. His mother, wife, and daughters were part of his inner circle. Women were given equal opportunity to study as Pythagoreans. He was the first man to call himself a philosopher, that is, a lover of wisdom. He founded a school in which initiates were sworn to secrecy and lived a communal ascetic lifestyle. Pythagoras introduced the concept of form as distinct from matter, and that the physical world is an imitation of an eternal mathematical world. Orphism which was a branch of Pythagoreanism, particularly popular in Macedonia and Greece, characterized human souls as divine and immortal, but doomed to live in a grievous circle of successive incarnations through metempsychosis, which can be escaped by those who become enlightened. The pentamikos, or pentagram, was used as a symbol of recognition by the Pythagoreans. It was the sigil of Hygeia, the goddess of good health, based on knowledge of the 5 elements. She was often depicted as a young woman with a snake wrapped around her body, somewhat like the figure of Lilith in Jewish mythology. The serpent represents wisdom, evolution, and the cycles of nature. The pentagram was also very popular among the followers of Philosophies, who was Pythagoras' contemporary from the Greek island of Syros. The concept of the 5 elements was most well known in Asian cultures. The sequence of fire, water, wood, metal, and earth is still used in Japan for the days of the week, from Tuesday to Saturday. For instance, Kayobi is Tuesday, and it means fire day. The element of wood symbolizes air and wind as well, while the element of metal can be used interchangeably with metaphysical concepts like void, space, ether, dark matter, and cosmic harmony. In Taoism, the pentagram is known as Wuxing Tu, or 5-element diagram. The generating cycle of elements is illustrated by a circle running clockwise around the pentagram, which in turn represents the conquering cycle, describing interactions between phenomena. The swastika was an important religious icon in most ancient cultures around the world, and it's still used as a symbol of spirituality in India, and it indicates the presence of a Buddhist temple on maps and street signs in Japan. The same geometrical figure, spinning clockwise, is favored in Himalayan religions, where it is known as Yungdrung. While swastika is a Sanskrit term meaning auspicious, in China it is called Wanzi, and is related to Wan Sui, which translates to long live, as in Wan Sui Mao Zedong, that is, long live Mao Zedong. The same word is pronounced banzai in Japanese. Another related Japanese term is manji, which means perfect or attractive. Another very popular symbol throughout Asia is the hexagram, known as Kagomemon in Japanese, Shatkona in Sanskrit, and Magen David in Hebrew. The mystical union of 2 triangles, one pointed up and the other down, represents divine union, heaven and hell, as above, so below. In Indian traditions, yantras have been used for thousands of years as an aid in meditation for the development of occult powers. Yantras typically have several geometric shapes radiating concentrically from the center. The Sri Yantra, or radiant diagram, consists of 9 interlocking triangles, symbolizing the cosmos. When represented in 3 dimensions, it contains all 5 Platonic solids. The Greek philosopher Plato, born in 428 BCE, associated each of the 4 classical elements, earth, air, water, and fire, with a regular solid, cube, octahedron, icosahedron, and tetrahedron, respectively. The 5th solid, the dodecahedron, symbolized the element which made up the heavens. Plato's theory of soul defined the human psyche to consist of 3 parts: appetite, spirit, and reason. In Hindu philosophy, they were called tamas, rajas, and sattva, respectively. In neuroscience, they're linked to the reptilian complex, the limbic system, and the neocortex, respectively. Plato's picture of the chariot allegory portrays the charioteer representing reason and two horses, which the charioteer needs to stop from going different ways. The intellectual virtues of reason promote the pursuit of truth and may lead to enlightenment. According to Plato's theory of forms, there are at least two worlds: the unstable physical plane, grasped by the senses, and an unchanging metaphysical plane, grasped by pure reason. According to Plato's teacher Socrates, concrete objects and events are shadows of their ideal, abstract form. Few climb out of their den of ignorance, and those who do not only have a terrible struggle to attain the heights, but when they go back down for a visit or to help other people up, they find themselves objects of scorn and ridicule. Pyrrho of Elis and his teacher Anaxarchus traveled from Greece to India in the 4th century BCE to study with Buddhist monks. After returning to Greece, he started a new line of philosophy holding that good and evil do not exist by nature, as all judgments of good and evil are relative to the one doing the judging. Pyrrhonism regarded suspension of judgment as key to attaining equanimity, which would in turn lead to awakening. In the 4th century BCE, the Greek sage Epicurus advocated living in obscurity, without drawing attention to oneself and without pursuing wealth or power. He taught that people should behave ethically, not because the god punished wrongdoers, but because the just man is most free from disturbances. Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence comes evil? Is God neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? Well, Epicurus's old questions remained unanswered until the Essenes, a Jewish sect of the 2nd century BCE, theorized that the spirit of light and the spirit of darkness had been created by God to determine the fate of each human being. In the Hebrew Bible, God is depicted as the source of both light and darkness, as well as good and evil. In the Old Testament, Yahweh is responsible for a number of cases of mass killings, such as the Great Flood, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and the plagues of Egypt. Satan is mentioned but a few times in the Bible. The book of Genesis mentions only a talking serpent who taught Adam and Eve the knowledge of good and evil, and therefore represents Lucifer. The first occurrence of the name Satan is in the book of Numbers, where the devil in person curbs a donkey. In the New Testament, Satan becomes a scapegoat for man's sins and an entity that allows God to claim all that is good in the world. Satan's promise to give Jesus all the kingdoms of earth implies that all those kingdoms belong to Satan. Satan is dubbed Lord of this world, meaning he is the ruler of the physical realm and the underlying nature of the visible universe. The Kabbalah goes on to present Satan as a force that exists to challenge human beings until they reach their collective transformation. So Satan is not a devil that exists independently and eternally. He is actually a good entity whose job is to help us to grow by putting us through a few tests. The first step of true human elevation is recognition of the opponent within, namely our ego, hubris, flaws, and vulnerability. In Christianity, Yahweh was gradually transformed into a holy, benevolent deity, and evil came to be seen as purely satanic. This conception was partly inspired by the Iranian prophet Mani in the 3rd century CE. On the one hand, his beliefs were strongly influenced by Buddhism. On the other, he taught an elaborate dualistic cosmology describing the struggle between a good spiritual world of light and an evil material world of darkness. Manichaeism spread with extraordinary speed through both the East and West, but was soon persecuted and virtually suppressed by the end of the 4th century. The Gnostic movement was carried from Asia Minor to Italy by Marcion, Cerdo, and Marcus in the 2nd century. Gnosticism dealt with concepts of illusion and enlightenment rather than sin and repentance. Reason was strongly favored over indoctrination. Gnostic cosmogony presented a distinction between a supreme hidden God and a blind, malevolent demiurge responsible for creating the material universe. In Gnosticism, somatic people were characterized by a prevalence of appetite and completely bound to matter. Psychic people exhibited a prevalence of spirit and were open to research and experimentation. Pneumatic people could boast a prevalence of reason and saw themselves as escaping the doom of the physical plane through esoteric studies and eventually awakening. The main Gnostic sects in Armenia and the Levant, from the 3rd to the 6th centuries, were the Archontics and the Paulicians. Since they allegedly believed in a pantheon of demons called archons, they were ostracized from their homeland and relocated to Bulgaria in the 7th century, where they came to be known as Bogomils, which translates to God's people. They believed that God had two sons. The rebellious elder son, named Satan, proceeded to enslave the earth's population, while the younger, Michael, variably identified with Jesus or Lucifer, came to enlighten humankind. Satan, the opposer, is the embodiment of independent thought and rebellion against the status quo. He is our ego, confronting everyone and everything, harboring ill feelings which may trigger a fight or flight response. Conversely, Lucifer, the light bearer, is the embodiment of expanded awareness and enlightenment. Every awakened master of the ancient wisdom has realized that the self in oneself is the same as the self in another and the self in everything. So, Satan and Lucifer represent two stages on the path to liberation, which requires gnosis or self-knowledge. As in the ancient Greek aphorism, know thee sauton, that is, know thyself. Bogomils rejected the ecclesiastical hierarchy, and their primary political tendencies were resistance to the state and church authorities. Being persecuted in the Balkans, many of them fled to Central Europe in the 11th and 12th centuries, where they gave rise to a new movement called Catharism. The remaining Bogomils were slaughtered and buried in unmarked graves, while others hid in caves and hermitages, and found work as scribes and painters. The legacy of Bogomil art can still be admired in the depictions of Satan and Lucifer in several Bulgarian and Macedonian monasteries such as Rila and Osogovo. The Codex Gigas is the most prominent medieval manuscript in the world. Created in a Bohemian monastery in the 13th century, it includes a large picture of Satan. The earliest Cathar community was active in Cologne, Germany in 1143. A landmark in the institutional history of the Cathars was their council held in Saint-Philippe-la-Rogue, France in 1167. Cathar is a Greek term meaning pure one. Most Cathars would call themselves bon homme et bonne femme, which translates to good men and good women. Outsiders call them Albigensians, after the French town of Albi, where the movement first took hold. Cathars venerated Jesus Christ, but denied his physical incarnation, believing him to be an angel, possibly Lucifer. In fact, in the book of Revelation, Jesus claims, "I am the bright morning star," namely Lucifer. Cathars rejected the Christian symbol of the cross, considering it to be not more than a material instrument of torture and capital punishment. Reproduction was viewed as a moral evil to be avoided, as it continued the chain of reincarnation and suffering in the material world. Cathars believed that one would be repeatedly reincarnated until one committed to the self-denial of the physical realm. They did not eat meat, eggs, or cheese, or any products of coition. They ate seafood, however, because they believed most sea creatures generated spontaneously through asexual reproduction. Cathars revered the Gospel of John and the apocryphal Acts of Peter. According to the latter, Peter went to Rome to overthrow Simon Magus, but was sentenced to death. So he tried to flee in the city, but saw an apparition of Jesus, who persuaded him to stay and accept crucifixion. However, he requested to be crucified upside down. Cathars saw women as equally capable of being spiritual leaders, and regarded Mary Magdalene as Jesus' closest disciple and the only one who truly understood his teachings. Cathar legends describe Mary Magdalene's wealth and beauty, as well as her alleged sea journey to France. She retired to a cave, and after she died, her skull and other relics were preserved in Saint-Maximin-la-Sainte-Baume. Cathar women were often considered to be witches. Angèle de la Barthe was allegedly the first witch to be burnt at the stake in Toulouse in 1275. The Cathar song Le Boyer mentions a woman named Joanne and ends with the verse, "She flew to heaven with her goats," a clear reference to a sabbatic ritual. The goat represents daring do and fearlessness. The idea of two gods, one good and the other evil, was central to Cathar beliefs. The former was the God of the New Testament, creator of the spiritual realm. The latter was the God of the Old Testament, creator of the physical world, whom Cathars identified as Satan. They believed human souls were the sexless spirits of angels trapped in the material realm, destined to be reincarnated until they attain spiritual perfection. From the beginning of his reign in 1198, Pope Innocent III attempted to end Catharism by persuading French authorities to act against them, and launched the Albigensian Crusade in 1209, attacking the towns of Béziers, Carcassonne, Toulouse, and the surrounding villages, killing tens of thousands of people. His successor, Pope Honorius III, appropriated the occult knowledge of Gnostics and heretics to write his own grimoire and demonic invocations. Meanwhile, the carnage continued. From May 1243 to March 1244, the Cathar fortress of Montségur was besieged by Christians. To the Cathars, Montségur was the house of God. Over 200 Cathars were burnt in an enormous pyre at the foot of the fortress. A small party escaped from the fortress before the onslaught and took with them a few ancient texts and several manuscripts and miniatures, which later served as the basis for the earliest tarot cards. The major and minor arcana are an allegorical representation of Cathar history and philosophy. For instance, Trump 16 is the Tower, which memorializes their defeat and the downfall of their stronghold of Montségur on March 16, 1244. Hunted by the Inquisition, the remaining Cathars became more and more scattered fugitives, meeting surreptitiously in forests and mountain wilds. The last known Cathar, Guillaume Bélibaste, was executed in 1321. 7 centuries later, scandals are hitting the Christian establishment, which is already struggling with declining membership in nearly every country across Europe and the Americas. Saint Malachi's prophecy has been suppressed and ridiculed by the Roman Catholic Church, but most of it has come true, counting down to the current Pope Francis as being the last to reign over the Vatican.